Tonight, I want to share with you a story that will change how you think about cause and effect forever. It's a story that powerful people tried to bury for over 700 years. A story about greed, betrayal, and consequences that echoed through generations. 200 million people died in just 5 years. Half of Europe wiped from existence. And what if I told you it all started with one man's impossible choice between honor and gold? You see, there are some truths that make people uncomfortable. There are some connections that seem too dark, too perfectly timed, too supernatural to be real. But tonight, we're going to explore one of those connections together. By the time our journey ends, you'll understand why medieval kings lost sleep over this story, why the church tried to erase it from history, and why it matters more to your life than you might think. This isn't just ancient history we're talking about. This is about power, about trust, about what happens when sacred promises are broken for money. This is about karma on a scale so massive that it reshaped the entire world. And yes, this is about you too, because the choices you make tomorrow will echo just as surely as the choices made in 1307. Let me take you back to a time when honor meant everything, and betrayal could curse entire bloodlines. Let me show you what happens when greed meets divine justice. Let me tell you about the day that changed everything, and how one man's dying words became the most terrifying prophecy in European history. Are you ready to learn what they never wanted you to know? Picture this. It's early morning in Paris, October 13th, 1307, a Friday. The sun is just beginning to paint the sky with soft gold, and across the city, men in white robes marked with red crosses are waking up to what they think will be another ordinary day. These are the Knights Templar, the most feared warriors in Christendom, the guardians of pilgrims, the keepers of sacred trusts. They have no idea that by sunset, their entire world will have collapsed. In the royal palace, King Philip IV has been awake all night. Not because he's praying or studying. No, Philip has been signing death warrants, sealed orders that his messengers are already carrying to every corner of France. Orders that will destroy the most powerful military organization in Europe. Orders that will set in motion a chain of events so terrible that people will still be talking about it 7 centuries later. You have to understand something about the Templars. They weren't just knights. They were the world's first international bankers. They had invented a system so revolutionary that modern banking still uses their methods. Pilgrims could deposit gold in London and withdraw it in Jerusalem. Merchants could move fortunes across continents with nothing but a piece of paper. Kings and queens borrowed from them. Entire kingdoms depended on their financial network, and Philip IV owed them everything. The King of France was drowning in debt. His wars had emptied the royal treasury. His people were starving. His nobles were questioning his authority. But the Templars, Those men in white robes, they had gold, mountains of it, enough to buy entire kingdoms, enough to make Philip's problems disappear forever. There was just one tiny problem. The Templars actually expected to be paid back. Now, here's where the story gets interesting. Philip could have negotiated. He could have asked for more time. He could have offered them lands or titles or marriage alliances. But greed doesn't think like that. Greed looks at a debt and asks a different question. What if the creditor simply disappeared? As dawn breaks over Paris, Philip's plan unfolds like a nightmare. Across France, royal guards are surrounding Templar houses, not to arrest criminals, not to stop rebellions, to seize the men who had trusted the crown with their lives. The same men who had died protecting Christian pilgrims. The same men who had fought beside French kings in the Holy Land. The same men who had built the very financial system that made France wealthy. In a single morning, Philip IV turned Europe's greatest heroes into Europe's most wanted criminals. The charges were absurd. Anyone with half a brain could see that. The Templars were accused of worshiping demons, of spitting on the cross, of practicing dark magic. These were men who had taken vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience. Men who had spent their lives serving God and protecting the innocent. But when you control the courts and the church is too weak to stop you, truth becomes whatever you need it to be. The real crime, the one that Philip couldn't speak out loud, was much simpler. The Templars had trusted him. They had lent him money because they believed in his word. They had supported his kingdom because they thought he was a man of honor. And now, instead of keeping his promises, Philip was rewriting history to make them the villains. Imagine how it felt for those men. Imagine waking up to find that everything you had believed about justice, about honor, about the sacred nature of oaths was a lie. Imagine discovering that the king you had served, the kingdom you had protected, the people you had died for, would throw you away the moment it became convenient. The Templars didn't go quietly. Why would they? They knew they were innocent. They knew the charges were invented. They knew that if they could just get a fair trial, if they could just speak the truth, the whole conspiracy would collapse. But Philip wasn't interested in fair trials. He was interested in confessions, and he had ways of getting them. Medieval torture was an art form, not the quick, brutal violence you see in movies. No, this was slow, careful, scientific. The goal wasn't to kill. The goal was to break the human spirit so completely that death would seem like mercy. Men who had faced Saracen armies without flinching were reduced to sobbing children. Warriors who had charged into battle, screaming prayers, were begging for the pain to stop. And one by one, they began to confess. Not because they were guilty, because they were human. Because everyone has a breaking point. Because when you're hanging by your wrists for days and they're slowly crushing your feet, and and you can hear your brothers screaming in the next room. The truth becomes whatever will make it stop. But there was one man who would not break. One man who had given his entire life to the order. One man who understood that some things matter more than pain. Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master of the Knights Templar, had watched his organization destroyed. He had seen his brothers tortured into false confessions. He had spent 7 years in Philip's dungeons, and he had come to understand something that would change the course of history. Some debts can only be paid in blood. By 1314, Philip thought he had won. The Templars were scattered. Their wealth was seized. Their secrets were buried. The Pope had officially dissolved the order. All that remained was a final ceremony, a public burning of the last Grand Master, a show of royal power that would close the book on this chapter forever. March 18th, 1314, a small island in the Seine River, right in the heart of Paris. The wood is already stacked. The crowds are gathering. Philip IV is watching from his palace window, probably thinking about all the gold he's stolen, all the debts he's erased, all the power he's consolidated. He's about to learn that some victories cost more than defeats. Jacques de Molay is brought to the island in chains. He's 70 years old. He's been tortured for 7 years. He's lost everything he ever loved. But when they ask him to confess one final time, to admit to crimes he never committed, something extraordinary happens. The broken old man straightens his shoulders. The victim becomes a prophet. The defeated knight becomes the instrument of divine justice. "I confess," he says, and the crowd leans forward. Philip smiles. The church officials nod with satisfaction. They think they've won. They think the story is over. They have no idea that it's just beginning. "I confess that I am guilty of the grossest iniquity," de Molay continues. "But the iniquity is that I have lied in admitting the disgusting charges laid against the order. I declare, and I must declare, that the order is innocent. Its purity and saintliness have never been defiled." The crowd gasps. The church officials look around nervously. Philip's smile disappears. This wasn't the plan. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. But Jacques de Molay isn't finished. 7 years of torture, 7 years of watching his brothers die, 7 years of helpless rage. And now he has everyone's attention. Now he has the chance to speak the truth. Now he has the power to balance the scales. "God knows the truth," he says, his voice carrying across the water. "God will avenge us. Philip of France, Clement of Rome, you have destroyed us unjustly. Before this year is out, you will both be called to answer before the throne of God." The silence that follows is deafening. Even the executioners hesitate. Medieval people understood curses. They understood the power of words spoken by innocent men about to die. They understood that what they were witnessing wasn't just an execution. It was a prophecy. But de Molay still isn't finished. The Grand Master looks directly at Philip's palace window, and his voice becomes something else entirely. Something that makes grown men shiver. Something that will echo through the centuries. And you, Philip, your line will be cursed for 13 generations. Your sons will die before their time. Your kingdom will know suffering beyond measure. The innocent blood you have spilled will cry out from the ground until justice is done. The torches are lit. The flames begin to climb. But instead of screaming, instead of begging for mercy, Jacques de Molay begins to pray. Not for forgiveness, not for salvation, for justice, for the innocent blood that has been spilled, for the sacred trusts that have been broken, for the price that must be paid. As the smoke rises over Paris, something changes in the air. The people who came to watch an execution find themselves witnessing something far more powerful. They scatter quickly, afraid to meet each other's eyes, afraid to speak of what they've seen. Because everyone present knows that they've just watched. Philip IV watches from his palace window until the flames die down. Then he turns away and tries to forget. But you can't forget prophecy. You can't escape justice. You can't outrun the consequences of betrayal. And within the year, Philip will learn exactly what Jacques de Molay meant. You know what's fascinating about prophecy? It's not magic. It's not supernatural. It's just truth telling itself in advance. When you plant seeds of injustice, you will harvest fields of suffering. When you break sacred trusts, you will be broken in return. When you choose greed over honor, you will discover that some prices are too high to pay. The first victim was Pope Clement V, the man who had helped Philip. Modern medicine probably couldn't either, but the symptoms were clear. Terrible pain, rapid decline, and right before the end, witnesses reported that he kept mumbling about a terrible mistake and begging forgiveness for something he couldn't name. The Pope, who had betrayed the Church's greatest defenders, was dead within the year, exactly as prophesied. Philip IV tried to ignore it. Coincidence, he told himself. Natural causes, pure chance. But medieval kings didn't believe in coincidence. They believed in divine justice. They believed that God keeps score. And as autumn approached, Philip began to have dreams. Dreams of burning men. Dreams of voices calling for justice. Dreams of debts coming due. November 29th, 1314. Philip IV decides to go hunting. Maybe he needs to get away from the palace. Maybe he needs to stop thinking about dead Templars and papal curses. Maybe he just wants to feel normal again. But as he's chasing his horse stumbles. He falls. And in that moment, 8 months after Jacques de Molay's execution, the curse claims its second victim. the King of France, dies slowly, in agony, calling out names that no one recognizes. Some say he was asking for forgiveness. Others say he was trying to explain something terrible. But the only word that everyone could make out, the only word that came clearly through his pain, was Templars. Two powerful men, dead within a year, exactly as prophesied. The royal court is terrified. The church is in chaos. And across Europe, people are beginning to whisper about divine justice, about curses that cannot be broken, about the price of betrayal. But the curse isn't finished, not even close. Jacques de Molay had spoken of 13 generations. He had promised that Philip's line would know suffering beyond measure. And over the next few years, as Philip's sons die one by one under mysterious circumstances, people begin to understand that what they're witnessing isn't coincidence. It's cosmic justice working itself out through human history. Louis X dies in the year 1316. Philip V dies in the year 1322. Charles IV dies in the year 1328. One by one, Philip's sons fall. Each death stranger than the last. Each death perfectly timed to fulfill the prophecy. The direct line of Philip IV disappears from history, and with it, the medieval world begins to crumble. But here's where the story gets really interesting. Because while the curse is working itself out through French royal bloodlines, something else is happening. Something that will make the deaths of kings seem like a gentle whisper compared to the roar of what's coming. Starting in the year 1315, just 1 year after the curse began, Europe enters what historians call 7 years of death on a scale that medieval people had never seen. The weather patterns make no sense. The harvests fail for no reason. People begin to starve in the richest kingdoms on earth. It's as if nature itself is preparing for something worse. Medieval people knew how to read omens. They understood that the world was connected in ways that modern people have forgotten. They saw the failed harvests, the strange weather, the dying kings, and they knew that something terrible was building. They just didn't know what. By 1346, Europe is weakened. The Great Famine has killed millions. The royal bloodlines are cursed. The church has lost credibility. Social order is breaking down. And then, exactly 40 years after the Templar arrests, exactly 40 years after Philip IV chose greed over honor, the curse finds its perfect weapon. October 1347. 12 Genoese ships limp into the harbor at Messina, Sicily. The dock workers who board them make a discovery that will haunt their nightmares forever. Most of the crew are dead at their posts. Those still alive are covered in black boils, vomiting blood, begging for death. And in the hold, among the cargo of silk and spices, something else has made the journey from the east. The Black Death has arrived in Europe. Now, I want you to understand something about the plague. This wasn't just a disease. This was death itself, walking through the streets of medieval cities, choosing victims with an intelligence that terrified everyone who witnessed it. Rich or poor, young or old, noble or peasant, it didn't matter. The plague was perfectly democratic. But it wasn't random. It followed trade routes like a living map. It moved with purpose, as if guided by an invisible hand. And it hit France hardest of all. By the summer of 1348, the plague has reached Paris, the same city where Jacques de Molay died, the same kingdom that Philip IV betrayed the Templars to save. And what follows is suffering beyond imagination. 30 to 60% of the French population dies. Entire families are wiped out in days. Bodies pile up in the streets because there aren't enough living people to bury the dead. The kingdom that Philip IV killed for is dying around him. The wealth he stole is worthless when there's no one left to spend it. The power he consolidated means nothing when his subjects are corpses. The curse has found its perfect form, and it's collecting on a debt that's 40 years overdue. But here's what makes this story truly extraordinary. The plague doesn't just kill people. It destroys the entire world that Philip IV built. The feudal system collapses. The church loses its authority. The royal bloodlines that seemed so permanent are revealed to be as fragile as everything else. By the time the plague burns itself out in 1353, Europe has been transformed so completely that it's almost unrecognizable. The medieval world dies with the plague victims. The modern world is born from their ashes. And all of it traces back to one man's choice between honor and gold. Now, you might be thinking, this is just coincidence. This is just history being dramatic. There's no way that one man's curse could cause the death of 200 million people. And you know what? You might be right. Maybe it was just a series of unfortunate events. Maybe the timing, Philip IV thought he was being clever. He thought he had found a way to get rich without paying the price. He thought he could betray trust, break sacred oaths, and destroy innocent lives without consequences. He thought he could cheat the universe. He was wrong. The universe doesn't forget. History doesn't forgive. And justice, however delayed, always finds a way to balance the scales. Sometimes it takes a year. Sometimes it takes a generation. Sometimes it takes 40 years and costs 200 million lives. But it always comes. And that's what makes this story so relevant to your life right now. Because every day you're making choices. Every day you're deciding whether to keep your promises or break them. Every day, you're choosing between honor and convenience, between integrity and profit, between doing, and the choices you make today will echo through tomorrow in ways you can't imagine. Now, I don't want you to be afraid. I don't want you to lose sleep over this, because the same force that brought justice to Philip IV will bring justice to you. If you live with integrity, if you keep your promises, if you treat others with respect and honor, then you're writing a different story. You're planting different seeds. You're creating a different future. The curse of the Templars wasn't really about supernatural power. It was about the natural law of cause and effect. It was about the way that broken trust creates broken lives. It was about the way that greed leads to suffering. It was about the way that choices echo through time. And eventually, Europe learned this lesson. The plague ended. The survivors rebuilt. The new world that emerged was wiser, more just, more aware of the connections between actions and consequences. The darkness passed and dawn came again, but the wisdom remains. The story endures, and every time someone chooses greed over honor, every time someone breaks a sacred trust, every time someone thinks they can cheat the universe, the ghost of Jacques de Molay whispers a warning. The scales will balance. The debt will be paid. Justice will be done. So tonight, as you go to sleep, I want you to think about your own choices. I want you to think about the promises you've made and whether you're keeping them. I want you to think about the trust that others have placed in you and whether you're honoring it. I want you to think about the kind of legacy you're creating with every decision you make. Because your choices matter. Your integrity matters. Your honor matters. Not because some medieval curse will get you if you mess up, but because you're writing your own story every day. You're planting seeds that will grow into tomorrow's harvest. You're creating the world that your children will inherit. And that's a responsibility that's both terrifying and beautiful. Terrifying because it means that everything you do matters. Beautiful because it means that everything you do matters. The Knights Templar are gone. Philip IV is gone. The Black Death is gone. But the principle remains. The universe keeps score. History remembers. And justice, however delayed, always finds a way. So choose wisely. Choose with integrity. Choose with honor. Choose as if your decisions will echo through generations, because they will. And may you sleep peacefully tonight, knowing that the same force that brought justice to a medieval king will bring justice to you, not as punishment, but as protection, not as a curse, but as a blessing, not as an ending, but as a beginning. The darkness always passes, the dawn always comes, and the choices you make today will determine. Your life is not an accident. Your choices are not meaningless. Your story is not over. And the universe, in all its mysterious wisdom, is always listening. May your dreams be filled with wisdom rather than gold. May your choices be guided by honor rather than fear. And may you remember that the greatest treasure you can leave behind is not what you accumulated, but what you gave away. Sleep well and dream of dawn.